In today's tutorial, I'm going to be covering some examples that I saw in an Obama interview made by VOX. There was a guy who had watched the videos, he sent it in, was curious how to do some of the effects, so I figured I'd cover that. Let's have a look at what exactly we're going to be making today. We're going to be working a lot with 3D space and the 3D camera tool in After Effects. And the goal for me is to show you a bunch of different tools and expand your tool set so that when you are in a position where you need to make something and you aren't sure, you have a bunch of different techniques and tools to fall back on. And with that being said, let's get straight into the tutorial. So in After Effects, I have my 1920 by 1080 composition, something very basic. I recorded 2 clips just so we have a bit more of a lively scene. But the first thing we're going to be animating today is an article in 3D space. Now, first we need the article. So I'm going to drag in my article. And you can, in some cases, use blending modes to hide the background by holding Shift and then clicking the minus button. You can shift through the different blending modes in After Effects. But today we are going to be using the color key tool to get rid of the background. So I'm just going to add that. And then I'm going to use the color picker to click the background. In some cases, you definitely want to fine tune the color key a bit more or even do it in Photoshop to get a better result. But this will work for our case today. From there, I'm just going to add an invert so we get white text for contrast reasons. And then I'm just going to use the rectangle tool to mask out the top because we don't really need that. And then I'm just going to set the mask to subtract. So now we have our very nice article. The next thing I want to do is I'm just going to drag this article right below actually and just cut it off right at the end, just so we have it lined up with our clips. And then I'm going to click the toggle switches modes and turn both layers into 3D space. And we're just using the classic 3D space because we want the depth of field and all that good stuff. Then I'm going to go in and create a new camera. I usually just go for 50mm. And then I just set the f-stop to 2.8 just because it's nice and low, give us some good depth of field. From there, we want to go into 2 view. So we have our regular active camera, and then I'm going to use a left-hand view. We want to put our clip at the very back and then our article way closer to the camera to create some of that separation. And from there, we can animate the focus distance to get some of that nice depth of field. So I'm going to start at about 2 seconds. And then I'm just going to click the clip. And in my 2 view, I'm just going to drag it backwards. And then I'm just going to hit S to increase the scale. And then I'm just going to scale it up and move it a little bit to the right just to get it nice and kind of close to what it was before. You can line it up better, but we're just doing it pretty rough. For our article, I want to move it way closer to the camera. And you can see our camera's all the way out here. So if we place it right here, we get a nice blurry text. I want to lower the scale of the article a little bit. And I want to place it on this screen kind of where I want it to be. So maybe even slightly smaller. Drag it up a little bit to the left, just so we just have this paragraph right here. I'm just going to close the 2 views and just get back to my 1 view. I want to open up the camera properties, camera options. And I want to set a keyframe for the focus distance. And then I want to go forward a little bit. And then I just want to drag this down until our text is in focus. As you can see, we've shifted the focus from the background to the text. I'm just going to move this keyframes back a little bit so the person has a bit more time to see what the text is about. If you want a blurrier background, you can mess with the aperture. You can drag it down, which will decrease it, or drag it up, which will make it more blurry. You could also just use the blur level. I'm going to change the iris shape to hexagon. It just makes it look a little bit nicer. And what it basically does is if you have a real lens, you have a bunch of blades that dictate what the bokeh looks like. The higher you go, the longer it'll take to render, but hexagon usually gives a pretty good result without being too intensive. I want to animate the opacity of the article a little bit just so it doesn't look too weird when it comes in. So I'm going to click my article layer, hit T to bring up opacity, keyframe about halfway through, go to the beginning and set it to 0. Playing that back, we just have it slowly fading in. I'm just going to make it a little bit slower. Then I'm also going to animate the position. So by holding Shift and P, we're going to bring up an additional property. So I'm going to keyframe the position, go backwards and just move it a little bit closer to the camera. So if we play that back, we just have kind of like almost like a parallax feel to it. You can go in and ease your keyframes. Another thing I'm gonna do is add posterized time to my article layer. I'm gonna move the opacity just a little bit forward, just so we don't get that initial slowness of the easing of the keyframes. Just shifting the focus to the article a little bit, just for some visual interest. Now, the second animation we're gonna be going over today is a timeline. We're just gonna keep it pretty simple, and to keep it super uncontroversial, we're gonna be making a timeline of when to eat certain meals. So breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, yada, yada, yada. You can make your timelines Photoshop or even inside After Effects or Illustrator. It just depends on what you're comfortable with. I like to do them in Illustrator just because I have the overload plugin. I'm going to hop into Illustrator. I just have a 1920 by 1080 canvas as well, just to match our sequence in here. We need to decide the length of the timeline. I like to do it by slotting in what I want the timeline to show. So if I start with breakfast, I'm just going to use the Helvetica font, and then I'm just going to Alt drag and hold shift to keep the position the same. And we need lunch. I do want to add snacks, so I'm just going to drag a snack in there and select all of them, and then I'm just going to use the align tool to align them all. We can go and click P just to create a stroke, and I'm just going to line it up with the ends of those two. Hit V to end our use of that tool, and then I'm just going to increase the stroke. Let's just go with 5. I'm just going to hold Option while dragging the edges just to evenly scale it up on the sides. So next up is creating our itty bitty little markers. So I'm just going to hold Shift, drag down a little bit, and now I'm just going to select this, move it until it is centered with that line. I'm just going to center it to the breakfast as well, and then I'm just going to Alt Shift drag it and kind of line it up with all our little text. And now that we have our timeline, I'm going to select it all and I'm just going to group it, and then I'm just going to center it to the composition, drag it down a little bit because this is where I want it to be. Select it all again. I'm going to right click and ungroup it, and then I'm going to use the overload plugin to send it to After Effects. So as you can see, all my text is still editable, which is why I love doing it this way. Just keeps it super easy, and we have all our shapes. So for this one, I'm going to use the Motion Tools plugin, and I'm just going to extract all the elements so we can edit them individually. Next, I want to select my shape layers, and I'm going to change the stroke to white, and I'm going to do the same with my text. Put all this in a pre-comp, and I'm just going to name this timeline. I'm going to move this up to match our clip. Now the way I want to animate it is just going from left to right. So I'm going to keyframe it at 1 second. I'm going to keyframe the end, go to the beginning and put it to 0. So now we have a timeline that animates out. I want to animate these as well. So I'm just going to copy the end from the trim pass, select all my layers, go to the beginning and hit Command V, and that'll animate everything. Deselect everything, just hit U, select all my keyframes, and I'm just going to ease them. And then I want to stagger these to come in one by one, since I want them to match kind of the pacing of the line. And for that, I'm just going to use the Motion Tools plugin again, which is free. I'm just going to offset it by 5 frames. Make sure that I have it going in the right direction so that the first one is that one, which is one I want to come in first. And then I'm just going to sequence them. If we play that back, this is what we have. The animation for this is a bit long, so I'm just going to take these keyframes, move them a bit closer to each other and play back. I feel like the spacing is a bit too far apart, so I'm just going to select all my layers, move it back, and then just do it by 3 instead. Then of course we want to animate our text to come in as well. For that, I want to do a simple position animation, so I'm just going to hit P to bring up the position for all of them, keyframe it, move it forward to match the timeline animation thing, move back to the beginning, drag it down so it starts below our line, and use the same easing. I am gonna sequence it. Our text is not in order, so what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna breakfast, then snack, lunch, snack, dinner, and select all of my layers, and I'm gonna sequence it. So if we play that back, and I'm just gonna take all these layers and I'm just gonna crop it in a little bit, or remove some of the beginning. Now we have this. And another thing that we are gonna be doing is I'm gonna create a little mask that we can use. I don't want the text to be visible below the line, so I'm just gonna create a shape, cut it so it's right at the line. Just move it up with your arrow key, and then we can hide it. Select all our text, toggle switch modes, and I'm just going to pick whip the track matte to it, but we need to invert it. So I'm just going to click this little thing here, and it's going to invert the mask. And if we play that back, we have a super simple timeline. And I want to focus on one specific time of day in this timeline. The way I want to do this is I still want my timeline to be up there so it's not too confusing. I'm going to select the layers that I want to hide. I'm going to hit T to bring up the opacity, and then I'm just going to animate that. And I also want to add the position. So keyframe the position, move forward and drag it down. Just select those keyframes we just did, apply the same easing, and now if we play this back, I think it would be really nice to stagger it a little bit. I want dinner and lunch to go down at the same time, and then I want to take the snack and move it about 3 frames. So if you play that back, we kind of have this little delayed effect. And then I'm going to add another effect. I'm actually going to add an adjustment layer. I'm going to add a camera lens blur. Now that we have our camera lens blur, we need to create a map for it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a shape and I'm going to make it black and line it up a little bit. I'm just going to drag it all the way behind so I can see what I'm doing. And I'm just going to line it up kind of with the center of it. And I'm going to add a fast VOX blur to it. And I'm just going to increase the iterations to about 10 just to get a nice good gradient and increase it a good bit. Then I'm going to create a solid and make it completely white. Drag it down below. I'm going to pre-comp this and name it blur map. And then I'm just going to hide it. And then in our camera lens blur layer, we are going to set the source to blur map and effects and masks. Click off repeat edge pixels. And as you can see, the black is where everything will be in focus. And again, you can change the shape of it to be higher quality. Hexagon works great. I'm going to increase the blur radius a little bit. And as you can see, we get a really nice blur effect on it. At the end of our animation of our text going away, I'm going to set a keyframe for the blur radius at the desired level. And then right at the beginning, I'm just going to decrease it all the way. I'm just going to ease it just a little bit. And if we play this back, this is what we're working with. So as you can see, the text kind of goes away and we get a nice little blur. Now, if we go back to our original comp and look at what we've made so far, this is what we have. Now, this looks very cool, but it's a bit too computer generated. So in my timeline composition, I'm just going to add a posterized time to it, set that to 10, and I'm going to add a transform to create that camera shake. I'm just going to place the posterized time below it and alt click the position, do posterized time 6, wiggle 200,2, and this is what we have. That's pretty much it for the timeline itself. I don't want to do too much else to it other than just having it animate out. Before we get to that, I want to take my timeline and I want to add it below the camera. I just want to split the camera here, so I'm just going to end it here and drag it below and match it to that sequence. And I want to add a new camera and we're just going to keep it pretty much the same, drag it up to match this. And what I want to do here is zoom in. We take our timeline, and hit P. We can animate the position of it. So I'm going to start right here where the timeline ends, and I'm just going to keyframe the position, and then I'm going to go forward into where it's all lined up, and I'm just going to drag it closer to the camera. And again, this might be easier to view, so if you just want to drag that way closer to the camera, up a little bit so that our snack is right in the middle. If we close this and just look at our one view, we are going to ease these keyframes. Again, we will open up our camera properties, camera options, and focus distance, keyframe that, go forward, change that to be closer to us until our text is in focus. Change this to hexagon, and I can tell that my positioning is a bit off, so I'm just going to go line it up with my keyframe, drag it a little bit to the right, just so we have it lined up pretty good. And I want to increase the aperture a little bit just to get a bit more of a drastic blur in the background. And once we have that zoomed in, I want to go back into our timeline and I want to animate the out of it. So I'm going to start off with my main timeline, and I'm actually going to keyframe both the start and the end because I would like it to collapse and meet right at where snack is. So I'm going to go forward a little bit, and then I'm going to drag the end until that marker point, and the same with the time. So just meet them right at 72%. Select both those keyframes and just apply the same easing. I want to take this and I just want to copy the keyframes, right click the keyframes, keyframe assistant, time reverse keyframes. And once we have that animated away, we want to start with first mark over here to be the first one to go away. I'm just going to increase the speed of it a little bit just so it's a little bit faster. So I'm just going to go 1, 2, 3 forward, move it 1, 2, 3, move the next two. So now we have this. We have our text, which I'm just going to keyframe the position. P to open the position, keyframe that to match the main timeline. Boom. Drag it below. Select the keyframes, make sure the easing is the same. Play it back. And I actually want to move this just a little bit. Now, if we play this back in our main composition with all the other effects applied, this is what we are looking at. I want to shift the focus back to our original point. So I'm just going to copy the last keyframe, move forward, and copy the first keyframe so that it disappears and we focus back on ourselves. And that brings us to the last animation of today. We are going to end on a pretty simple note. We are going to be creating a lower third. In most cases, you have the name, profession or occupation or who they are, whatever. And then usually a little shape element for a splash of color or a little bit more glare. We are going to start out by creating our name, and I'm going to use Helvetica again. And I'm just going to type out my name, change the font, increase the scale a little bit, and I'm going to right align it. I'll left align it. Now we have our text here, and it's a good idea. I mean, you can use whatever font you want. It's really up to you, but it's a good idea to use a font that has a lot of different weights. So we're going to duplicate this and move it below, and we're just going to change the subtitle to what I do. So I'm just going to be super cool guy, and then I'm going to change the weight of the font, which is what I was talking about earlier, to light, and then I'm just going to decrease the size ever so slightly and move it up a little bit. Last thing we need is a cool shape, so I'm going to use the rectangle tool, and I'm going to select a cool color like orangey yellow, and I want this to come out here on the side, and I want it to be just a little bit longer than everything else, but kind of line it up with the two. Pre-comp them, which is a very good idea, so I'm just gonna lower third. So inside our lower third composition, I'm gonna zoom in, and we are gonna start out with the path. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna open up the contents of it, and since it's a shape, what I'm gonna do is right click the rectangle path and convert to Bezier path, and that will just convert it into a regular path and just make it easier to animate. So I'm gonna go 12 frames forward, keyframe it, go back. I'm going to select my points down here, and I'm just going to drag them up to the beginning so it animates downwards. So if we play that back, we just have a super simple animation thing, but it's a bit plain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this to yellow and duplicate it and put our new duplicated layer below and rename it white. And I'm going to change the fill to white. Then I'm just going to move the layer, the yellow one, forward a little bit. As it animates in, we start with the white, and then the yellow kind of catches up to it. The next thing I want to do is I want to animate the super cool guy and my name. So I'm going to start with the position. I want to match it kind of to the shape animation just to kind of drive the animation a little bit. So I'm going to keyframe the position and then move backwards and move this up a little bit. Keyframe that as well. I want to start the animation with the pole and then have the super cool guy come in a little bit afterwards. So it kind of pushes us in. Super easy animation, a little bit of impact, nothing too crazy going on yet. Now there's a couple more things I want to do. I want to play with some of the text properties. So I'm going to open up the Mapole, click on the text, and I'm going to click Animate. First thing I want to do is opacity. I'm going to add a wiggly selector to it. I'm going to set the opacity to end at 100% along with my animation. So keyframe opacity, go back to the beginning, 0. And I'm actually going to scoot this forward a couple frames, remove the wiggles per second, and correlation at 50 is fine. Alt click the random seed, and I'm just going to add time times 100. And if we play that back, we get a little bit of a flickering effect as it comes in. And I want it to last for just a little bit longer. So I'm just going to drag the keyframe, the last one for 100% forward a little bit. Another thing I want to add to it is a little bit of movement to the text itself. Once again, I'm going to click the text and animate, and then I'm going to animate the position. You can change the name of this. So if we move this to wiggle position, just to keep track, because when you do a lot of them, it can get pretty confusing. I once again want to add a wiggly selector. I'm just going to move the position ever so slightly just so we get a little bit of movement in the characters. Set the wiggle slash second to 0. Just let's set it to 200 for example. And then we'll click it again to add an expression. Do the poster as time, 6, wiggle, and you can do the 200, 30. So it'll shift between the 30 different numbers, and it'll just give us a little bit more of a choppy look, which I really dig. And I'm just going to open up my text, and I'm going to copy this. Just select all of this. Command C, just go to the beginning. Command V it for the other text, and now we have it on both texts. The last thing I want to do is animate the out of this. Now I want to animate the out of it. So I'm going to select my 2 shape layers, hit U to bring up the path, and I'm going to keyframe them both. And I'm going to go forward a little bit, select my points on this first one anyways, move forward to cover the whole text, and do the same for the yellow. Select them both, add the easing, and again, we want the white to come first so that we get the same kind of look from before. The yellow covers the whole thing. I want to cut off the white, so I'm just going to split that, and then go 1 frame forward, another keyframe, forward again, and then I just want to get the last 2 end bits like that. While the whole text is covered up, you can just delete the text layers. The out animation is a bit slow, so I'm just gonna drag it closer a little bit. So again, just adjust the length of our text to be gone while it's completely covered, and boom. Now we're gonna go back into our main composition. I'm just gonna add a posterized time, set that to about 10. I'm gonna take my transform, my little camera shake from the timeline, and add it to my lower third as well. I'm just gonna put it at the end because that's kind of where we have space for it. And now let's see what we have made to date. And just like that, we have a little VOX style sequence. Nothing too crazy, but a lot of good elements you can use in interview videos. Now, I want to emphasize again that you can create so many different results with these tools. You don't have to use it exactly like I've shown in this video. It's just to give you an idea of how you can use it. But anyways, I appreciate you guys, all girls, so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed watching along, or you learned something new, or, you know, just refreshed some things you haven't thought about. But yeah, thank you, and bye.